afternoon.
Did you enjoy lunch?
My God. God, I just realised my laugh on a microphone's a bit loud. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a lovely lunch. So we're going to have a fireside chat, minus the fireplace, myself and Gary. I think everyone's been talking about relationships and connection today, and I met Gary actually 9 years ago in Car Trawler, a company I was working at the time, and he came in and did a presentation on high performance. And I always remember it was in our rooftop meeting room, and you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was unbelievably engaged and taken with Gary's presentation and the work that he'd done with the Irish boxing Olympic team during his time in the Institute of Sport. And after that then, Gary worked with me on a leadership framework, which was actually 9 years ago, but really is probably very relevant for now. It was about real collaboration, style leadership, and very flexible leadership framework. And during that time, I got to know Gary, and we really connected on our values. He's a great family man, and we actually had children at the same time. I had Elena and he had Gracie. So we've connected over the years and stayed in touch because we have the same value system, I believe. And he's always been a firm friend and a great support. So very grateful to be able to interview him today on the topic of well-being and well-doing.
Thanks, Gillian.
Yeah. So I'll start off, I think well-being is like a bit like success. Everyone has their own definition of what well-being is. I'd love to hear what your definition of well-being is.
I need to think about my own well-being first. For me, I think it's a sense of personal control over my life or for other people over their lives and what's happening both in their private lives and professional lives. But when you go a little bit deeper, it's the quality of our relationships, both the relationship we have with ourselves and how our sense of confidence in ourselves and confidence in our ability, but also confidence to socially engage with others is really important. The relationship we have with our work, our colleagues, probably even more importantly with our leaders, is critical to our well-being. And then finally, the relationship we have with those we love, our family, our partners, our children. And when these relationships are out of sync, because we're trying to spin a lot of things often in this very modern world that we're in, our well-being gets impacted for sure, because we lose a sense of personal control while we're trying to please or trying to meet the expectations of all these things that are important to us in our lives.
I think that's really interesting, the self piece and the relationships. I looked up a definition of human well-being, and it's around the quality of the relationships in your life. So I think that's really important. In organizations, when we talk about well-being, sometimes in well-being strategies, we talk about things like yoga or mindfulness or, and sometimes people say they're like the sticky plaster. Do you think we've gotten it wrong and that we really need to focus on how we can enable people to discover themselves, or how we can work on the relationships in the workplace and put time and effort into setting those up for success?
I think organizations are trying to do the right thing, and a lot of what you described there are initiatives that seem to certainly be supportive of well-being, but unless we address the real impactors or factors that impact negatively on well-being, we're not actually going to be able to develop environments that are more conducive to our employees' well-being. And you know what, a leader is an employee as well. So they're human beings as well. They experience the same challenges. So it shouldn't really be too difficult for leaders to understand how they can create an environment that is more conducive to a well-being workforce, or a workforce being more, the well-being being more in a positive state. And I think if you go into good organizations, it's because they have leaders who see as their primary responsibility the people that are within the organization. The primary responsibility is the people within the organization. And if that's the case, those leaders are often finding a way or ways to make the environment better, to make working within the environment easier for employees, to get internal obstacles out of their way so they can do some of their best work in that space. So there are a lot of leaders in this auditorium today, and if we don't feel that that's our responsibility, if we feel, okay, we have to drive success and we have to drive growth within our business, but if we're doing that at the cost of people, well then we're going to hit a wall at some point. It's going to leave damage and disruption in people's lives as a result of that. And I think the future may be that people will not want to work in those organizations. They simply will not choose to work under that type of leadership.
We've had a conversation before where, and you're a high performance expert and you work in high performance all the time. I do worry that the term high performance is something that's been taken from potentially the sporting world and implemented in the workplace. And actually, I think it's creating burnout. We put these people that we believe are high performers and other people have to aspire. We have people that are high achievers and want to do well. So we're pushing people. Have you any thoughts on that, or how we can create a high performing environment with maintaining well-being for the employees?
The best definition I've heard of high performance is the best of us in every moment, or the best of me in every moment. And if I have 10 performance ability, but today all I can give is 8, well then that's the best of what I can give today, and that's perfectly good enough. Also within high performance, I think it's about realizing potential, and so that the potential of our workforce is always going to be different. Some can reach higher heights, and some will reach mid-tier heights, and some will reach somewhere below that. And we need to celebrate people's potential. What does that look like? Often we spend the time in many ways, getting dependent on high performers, high achievers, and we push until they either leave or they break. And we don't see the need to understand them, understand what makes them tick, and understand how we support them to sustain that level of performance in the organization. And then sitting below that, when we look at human performance, both at an individual level, at a unit level, at a function level, whatever that is, to really get behind what does it take and how do we teach and develop people to perform in a much more efficient way and a much more sustainable way, as opposed to just saying, here's the goal, here's the ambition, we need you to work and make this happen, and we don't really give you an education or a development or an understanding as to how to do that better and how to ultimately sustain it over the longer term. In sport, if we were to do that, and by the way, when we talk about sport, there's a lot of broken sport. There are a lot of teams who haven't figured it out. But those teams who do figure it out really understand, those leaders within those teams really understand the importance of the environment, the importance of purpose, and a purpose that has a higher meaning for the collective, the importance of connection and alignment across the team, that where nobody is more important than anybody else, where we all have a role to play in the collective success. It's not good enough if you're doing a solo run. It's not acceptable for you to be great at what you do and operate in a silo. We just, in the best environments, we do not allow that to happen. It's a non-negotiable that we need to help, support, connect around what we're trying to collectively achieve together. That, for me, is a really exciting team or organization to be part of. And we should be challenging on that basis. How do we talk a lot of, when I'm coaching individuals, I talk about, well, how do you get out of your own way so that you can allow yourself to step forward? From an organization context, it's, well, how do you organizationally get out of your own way? How do you remove the obstacles and the limiters to people's success and people producing better performance? Or how do you really ensure, like, we give autonomy before we try and figure out alignment. We should try and figure out alignment before we give autonomy, and say alignment is the most critical thing, that ultimately the quality of our organizational relationships will determine our success more than anything else, the quality of our organizational relationships. So that should be a primary focus, I would suggest, for leaders. And in the best teams that I've worked with, who not only have had success, but have managed to sustain that and bring new talent in and progress that talent through the system, and respectfully release talent who have come to the end of their career. Those leaders are very, very clear around what their responsibility is in that regard. The empowerment piece is that they know that from a leadership perspective, they achieve success through others. They don't achieve success through what they do. They achieve success through the quality of their leadership and the quality of their care and their challenge to make the environment the best it can be.
Do you think that's where we've gone a little bit skewy, in the sense that probably socially we've become a little bit individualistic? Some of the reward strategies within the workplace are based on personal performance, results, transactional. Do you think that's maybe where we need to look to a new direction, more collective, more about helping others and focusing on rewarding and creating that environment?
100%. And I don't know why we haven't fully moved to a team performance reward recognition model. We don't want people to act as individuals, yet we reward them as individuals. And we're probably missing something. And there may be a mix or a balance between the individual reward and the team reward. But we're not rewarding team performance. We're not really recognizing that. So we're essentially saying that's not something we value. We value your individual performance. We value you going out and doing a solo run for us and scoring lots of goals. It's like a team that continues to lose. And the player goes off the pitch and he reads the paper the next morning and he sees himself or herself scoring as an 8 or a 9 and he goes, happy days. Yet the team continues to lose. All right? So no matter how well you've performed for the team, if your team loses, you should feel the pain. You should feel the pain and you should want to connect with the team to help them to get through that pain and to a better place from a performance perspective. So how we understand teamwork in the context of business, the context of our organization is really important. And that starts at the top level, because a lot of senior C-suite leaders will get to that place through a very functional, focused, success-driven unit. And then they move from that space into an enterprise leadership, and yet they're still sitting around the table often with a functional mindset and a functional focus. As long as my part of the show does well, I don't really have to worry about how the collective is doing. So I think there's a good debate to be had and a good space to find reflection for leaders to say, if we want really good quality teams across our organization, how are we exemplifying that in our own behavior and practice? So that, like Gillian, you're the CPO, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer, you come into my team anytime, and you know what, the language that I'll be using with them will be very similar to the language that you're using with them. The ambition that you have will be very similar to the ambition that I've shared with them. So there's no real difference. We're aligned, we're speaking the same language, and we're connected on what we're trying to achieve together. And that also means that if I have to connect with you around our interdependency and setting mutual objectives, that's a much easier conversation because we've agreed that this is our purpose, this is where we're trying to get to. So it's a non-negotiable that we need to be more collaborative, more aligned in terms of how we approach our success. And I think when we're in that space, we get to a position where I believe we can create better environments. We can develop people to go well beyond where they are. So it's not about we take a really good talent in the organization and let them go. Off you go, do your best work. We go, there's your talent, here's your potential. This is where we see you. That we keep pointing the potential out to our people. Well, here you are, but this is where we see you, and here's how we're going to support you to get there, right? It's just that sense of, it's not the organization that just achieves the success and the growth, but it's the people within the organization say, okay, this is also about me, my career, and if I decide to leave this organization, I want to look back and say, thank you very much. This experience was a great experience, and you've allowed me the opportunity to step into this next space.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I know.
But it also sounds a little bit like, just in the corporate world, is it like a unicorn? Are we expecting too much? We've had, the pandemic, we've had chief pandemic officers, we're expecting so much from leaders. Do you think there's probably a role for, say, an organizational psychologist or a performance coach that would help, enable leadership teams to transition to this type of way of working? Or are we expecting too much from our leaders?
I'm going to be tough on leaders. And, leaders either change the world or they break the world. They're either doing bad stuff or they're doing good stuff. I'm so passionate about leadership because I believe in leadership. I believe in leaders. If the leader doesn't feel, he or she does not feel that they're in the right space to be able to deliver a leadership that the organization needs, they need to seek help. They need to be open to being vulnerable within the organization. I think that type of behavior is really powerful, right? And it encourages that behavior across the organization. And they need support, they need coaches, but it's what they're using the coaching for that's really important. From an organization perspective, we have a lot of HR leaders in this audience and people who are responsible for HR within the organization, but potentially there's a need for some form of performance directorate within organizations where we can truly understand how to support our employees to achieve performance much more efficiently and much more sustainably, and that we're educating the organization around human performance, like managers who essentially don't know how to coach their teams, they don't have the capacity to coach individuals, and even if they are spending some time on individuals, they're not getting to the broader base. So how do they communicate and coach with a collective of 30 or a collective of 100? How do they do that more effectively? So it's getting into our organization and saying, well, what do we really know about performance? We know about our business. We may have a view on our context, but is that view a shared view? Is that a shared view? Are we aligned on purpose? And if so, well then how do we generate an elevated level of performance without breaking people? It's not about the quality, it's not about the effort, it's about the quality of energy that people can bring to the space and a recognition that within that, recovery is absolutely critical. That resilience is not a resource that sits there like always. You have to recover it. That confidence is not a stable piece. It has to be cultivated, right? So the way in which we're communicating, the way in which we're providing feedback, the consistency of that feedback in a way that is actually caring about the individual or the collective that's trying to deliver that performance is really, really important. And so I think there's an opportunity again for us to have that conversation around human connection, human groups, not only individual performance, but this sense of a connected performance. How do we train and develop managers to understand that space, to study that space, to be more curious about that space, and ultimately recognize that it's their responsibility, not to focus on things, but to focus on people. And if you focus on people and you genuinely separate the person from the role. So I want to try and get to know you as a person. I'm not just interested that you're chief X or you're director Y or you're manager this or you're an analyst or a developer. I'm interested in who you are, where you're from, what do you love in life, what are some of your struggles. Oh, I don't want to know about your private business. I just want you to come in here and be a professional and manage to leave everything outside the door. Impossible. What affects our private life will affect our professional life. What affects our professional life will affect our private life. That's the bottom line. And when we start to treat people as proper human beings, they raise as a result. They give us more. They want to give us more because they feel that we care about where they're going. We care about what's going on. You need space, take your space. Take your space. Space is important. We don't get time to reflect. In business, we don't get enough time to reflect. We're just doing job, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it is. How do we learn if we don't reflect? How can we learn from experience if we don't evaluate it together? We don't look back and see, well, how can we be better? So that we're always looking at. In sport, we're looking at that every single day, every single week, every single performance. We're looking back at evaluating that together to see what we can learn. How does that affect my ability, how I shape my ability, how I develop my ability, how I polish my skills, or how I develop new skills within the space? We're asking players in a professional game to be vulnerable, to speak about their mental performance issues, to speak openly about it, to be vulnerable in that space, because what we share, others gain from, and what we share gives us a sense that, okay, I don't want you to solve my problems, Gillian. I just want to be in a position to be able to share some of the difficulties I have. Anyone who's listened to Brené Brown will know that that vulnerability is a powerhouse. It allows us to, it gives us permission to change. It gives us permission to figure out how to be creative around it. And it's extremely powerful because we become more innovative around how we can navigate the organizational challenges. So high performance, by the way, it is important that you, as an organization, have a definition for it in your context, and you talk about what that is. It is values-based. It is purpose-driven. Values for me, and it was spoke about earlier, is all about behavior, because performance is behavior, and behavior is performance. So if you're not seeing a performance that you like, it's behavior-driven. And so in sport, we have those tough conversations because that's, what, no, by the way, I'm saying sport in general. I'm saying in the sporting environments that are more high performing in what they do and consistently so, they are learning environments. They're lessons cultures. They're looking for the lessons. They're trying to glean what they can from an insight perspective to get better. But they also approach failure in a very positive and productive way. So yeah,
Very
I went
good.
on too much.
It was all very interesting. I have notes here. But we do only have about 2 minutes late. I can see Robert circling at the door there. So I'd love to know what your view is of well-being into the future. Like, we've had huge change. Everyone's talking about it. What do you see into the future? Do you see it changing, different? What's your prediction?
I worry for the future.
Okay.
So my fear is, so I won't tell you what my prediction is because I am a process individual. I like to stay in the step that I'm in as often as I can. And I know that intention drives attention. So the big question is, what is our intention for the future? And it's a hard job for leaders to figure out from a well-being perspective or from a healthier organization perspective what the intention is. My greatest concern is that the hybrid model or some form of it leaves some people isolated. We are social beings. We need social connection. To achieve things together, we need to be together. So I wouldn't rush too quickly to one side or the other. I'd be thinking about what, from a well-being perspective, when we get isolated, that's a very dangerous thing for our well-being for sure. And we have to keep the debate and the discussion and the conclusion drawing that we're going to do, we have to keep it open over time. But there needs to be an intention that, given what we've experienced over the last 2 years, that we can get to a better place. And if you're coming out of this pandemic with not a real clear sense of what that is, well, that's potentially an opportunity. I shouldn't say a real clear sense, but a desire to get to a better place, well, then that's potentially an opportunity lost.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gary. What I've taken away is that we need to make space for reflection, recovery, and relationships, and quality relationships play a big component to well-being. So
100%.
thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for listening.